Okay, we're talking about something slightly different today. So I thought I'd bring a different format because I'm talking about mindset. What is the mindset that you need as a network chair, as an ERG Programme Manager, as an inclusion lead, looking after networks, as a sponsor? That is what I'm talking about today. I'm going to be talking about resilience. I'm going to be talking about limiting beliefs. And I'm going to be talking about how do you know when mindset isn't enough and actually it's time to call it a day. So that's what I'm getting into. This is ERG Strategy, the channel that brings you tips, tools, advice, techniques to create engaged, effective, high impact employee resource groups and networks. So you're in the right place. I'm on my morning walk. New videos every Tuesday. And I go live every Friday morning at 8:30, and I have a Substack where the link will be below. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about today, and I thought I'd just bring a slightly different format to this. This is something I used to do, walking and talking videos. Walking for me is how I do a lot of my processing and sort of thinking about things, so this seemed apt. And I'll tell you why the inspiration came for this video. I've been having a few conversations on the back of the ERG summit that we had in London. Thank you again for everybody that came and took part, and also for the incredible case studies. Because actually I've been going through the feedback, and the feedback's been incredible. So thank you again to everybody, and to our amazing case study companies as well. But what was really interesting about the feedback was there were one or two individuals who were like, as incredible as the case studies were, it was almost like they still couldn't tap into the takeaway learns, because they thought maybe this doesn't apply to us because we're in a different sector, or maybe this wouldn't work for us because we don't have big budgets, or maybe this won't work for us because we're not an XYZ network. All of these things that I've heard, and I'm like, this is really strange. And then something just said to me, this is about mindset. And you'll know if you were at the summit on the day, or if you've worked with me, you know, I'll sometimes talk about a framework called the 3 M's, which is something needed for change and for behaviour change. And the 3 M's are mindset, motivation, and method. And basically, when any of those isn't in the right place, it's hard to get change, right? So to these networks that are thinking, we heard these great case studies, but we don't think we could impact it, I thought, let me just start with the mindset, because we definitely worked on the method. And I know that a lot of people were certainly motivated in the room, but we worked on method in terms of how are high impact networks achieved. But what we didn't work on was mindset. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So first of all, limiting beliefs is something that you kind of hear about in, like, I want to say the world of entrepreneurship. The world of entrepreneurship talks about this thing called limiting beliefs. And I'd actually really encourage you as networks, whether it's you as a network chair, with your committee, or if you are the head of inclusion or the inclusion lead that looks after the networks, maybe pull the network leads together and have a session on limiting beliefs. What are the limiting beliefs that we've got, you know, about our ability to deliver high impact projects? And if you're not sure what I mean by high impact projects, for me, this is projects that benefit not only network members, but they also benefit wider colleagues in the organisation, customers and or clients, and also potentially the wider community, right? Things that tick all of those boxes, those are high impact projects, right? So sitting down and thinking about, right, I'm just about to go up a hill, so excuse me if the breathing gets even heavier. But thinking about What are the limiting beliefs? So is it something like, we don't have the budget? Is it, we're in a different sector? Is it we're a different type of network? And what I'd encourage you to do is go back through and watch the videos I've done where I'm talking through the case studies that were presented in the ERG Leader Summit. There were 3 of them. And there's also a fireside chat, which should be live by the time this video goes live. So we had 3 organisations, different sectors, different networks. We had an LGBTQ plus network, a disability and neurodiversity network, a gender network looking at like women's safety. And in the fireside chat, we also had a global majority network. So as in race, ethnicity, faith and culture, right? So I want you to really go back. Oh my gosh, there are some deer up ahead. I want to spin around and see whether you can see that in the background. I don't know whether you can. This is why I love my early morning walks. Anyway, so I want you to really, I'm going to walk backwards, see if you can see the deer running up the road. Maybe. But I want you to really think about these limiting beliefs that maybe you have as networks and think about whether they're true or not. And I'm hoping that by really analysing the case studies and the evidence and talking it through as a group, hopefully you realise that some of these limiting beliefs are actually not correct and that there are always ways to get around them. So I'll just give you the one example. Budget, lack of budget is something that I hear a lot. I hear networks saying, we can't do so many things we want to do, but we can't because we don't have the budget or the resources. In the case studies that were presented at the summit, one of the things that was really common was that by getting like business case sign off or, getting business support from the sponsor, from the organisation, basically meant that business resources were put onto the project. So this wasn't the ERGs funding all of the change. Like, that is not sustainable. This was about the ERGs influencing into the business such that business resources were then put onto the actual change. So that's what we're talking about in terms of, that limiting belief of budget. When you actually scratch at the surface, it's not correct because the budgets for these impactful networks were actually being provided through the business, right? Through regular BAU budgets. So that's just one example. Now, the other thing I want to talk about in terms of mindset is resilience, right? Which is quite apt because I've just walked up that hill and I'm still on a hill. It's a very hilly walk, right? So resilience has kind of got a bit of a bad rep, and I think for good reason, because certainly when I think about when I was in the corporate space in the 9 to 5, resilience basically was almost being used as like an excuse for bad behaviours in organisations, and people would just sort of say, well, you just got to be more resilient. Like, it was terrible. I think we've moved past that now, hopefully. But for you as a network leader, and I don't need to tell you this, and if you're an ERG Programme Manager or an inclusion lead that looks after networks, you will know that, workload is challenging for network leaders. But not just workload, it's the emotional toil of sort of feeling as though you're constantly fighting with individuals for change, for equity, for social justice. That can feel really difficult, actually. And so all of those things can really chip away at your resilience and potentially lead to things like burnout. So I think there's something about, again, the mindset, almost like expecting that you are going to have for example, challenges. The workload is going to be a struggle, but figuring out how to manage that, with your committee, with the right structures, with the right people around you, so you're not doing everything. And then also the emotional toil as well. Bearing in mind that it is going to be difficult at times. You are definitely going to get people that aren't in favour of what you're doing. That's just like the reality of it, right? So all of that goes into having a mindset that almost expects that and is ready for it, so you can be resilient. However, what I do want to say is, for me, resilience isn't about, getting to the point where literally your mental health is suffering, or getting to the point where you're literally burning out. And there's something about, I think there are two things you can do about this in terms of cultivating the right mindset, but then also having like some guardrails and some safety checks. So using your sponsor as a sounding board to say, look, here's the situation, or this is how I'm feeling. Do I just need to suck it up, or actually is there a structural issue and do I need a bit more support here? So either getting that support from your sponsor, or if your sponsor is the issue, which is not uncommon, then maybe having that conversation with your inclusion lead. So basically just having like a sounding board to say, this is how I'm feeling. Do I just need to like dig in and be a bit more resilient, or actually, is there some more support that I can get? And the chances are, if you've got either A, a good sponsor, or B, a good inclusion lead, they will be able to spot and see those signs and hopefully help you through that, so that you are resilient when you need to be resilient, and that you get the support when you need the support. But then finally, the final thing I want to talk about though is what I'm not telling you to have is toxic positivity, right? There is that saying of like, almost like, I don't want you to like have this false optimism where everything around you is telling you that like, things are not going well, right? And I had a conversation recently with a relatively new network. So somebody that's trying to like start a new network or get a new network going. And they'd come to me for some support around planning for a milestone event. And it became quite clear, sort of relatively quickly after a couple of conversations, that there was not support in this organisation, not at a senior level, and not really even in the inclusion team. And actually, I would actually go as far as saying there was active resistance isn't the right word, as in coming from the senior leadership team, but there was almost like active, we are not playing this, like this DEI thing right now, like we are not doing this. You could see it if you just read between the lines, and you didn't even have to read that hard, to be honest. And so, so no amount of mindset is going to overcome some of those structural barriers, right? And so I sort of had to say to her, you've got to be quite strategic, and you've got to look at this realistically and say, what is there that I can do? And actually, I've kind of got two choices. So here's the thing. I think if you're in a situation like that, where it's clear that there is no senior support, if anything, there is active senior discouragement, and also you're not getting support from your inclusion team, I think you've really only got two options. The one is you can meet informally and socially with the individuals that you think might be interested in coming together as a network, but I would suggest that you're doing that in your own time. So you're doing that in evenings, right? So maybe you are arranging a quarterly networker, and you're literally doing it in evenings. So you could even just call it a quarterly night out if you want to, and that will just start the conversations, and it might do some of the work of creating some of that community. So that's one thing that you can do. The second thing that you can do is you can just park the network for now, focus on your role and delivering your role until the organisation is ready for a network. And for me, that was like that was like that's the reality check version that no amount of mindset is going to overcome. That said, there's one caveat that I would put to that, and there is a saying, which is the man who thinks they can and the man who thinks they can't are both right. And I think there is something about, and I think I talked about this in the video that I did around what skills you look for in a new co-chair, because I think there is this skill of, and some of it is mindset, having the confidence as an individual in your ability to influence into senior levels is actually very powerful. And if you do have the skill and you do have the self-confidence, that can be quite powerful in terms of turning situations like that around and getting the necessary people that you need on board to support you. And so, you know, that's something to potentially cultivate, that mindset, you know, develop that muscle of influencing into senior leaders. That's going to help you no end, not even just in your network, that's going to help you in your career and everything. But as well as the skill, it does need that mindset, that self-confidence, which can be difficult, especially if you're in a role where you haven't necessarily always had a lot of visibility and exposure to senior leaders. Developing that mindset of that self-confidence can be quite tricky. And that's where things like, you know, logging your achievements, going to social events and just being brave and starting those conversations with senior leaders is really important, right? And that's it. That's all I wanted to talk about. So I really hope that was useful. And so I've got somebody running up behind me. I'll see you next week. Bye.